Hi, this is an introduction to the course Messianic Jewish Spirituality. I'm Michael Schiffman. This is the first time I'm making a video myself, so we'll see how it works out. When we talk about spirituality, uh, a number of things we have to consider. First of all, in the Christian world, they talk about spirituality as referring to your walk with God. If you are in the Jewish world, they don't talk about spirituality. They would refer to the concept more as mysticism or being mystical. And that sounds almost cultic in the Christian world, but it doesn't carry those connotations in the Jewish world. So when you're reading about Jewish mysticism, what they really mean is Jewish spirituality. If you talk in the secular world, spirituality is like an alternative idea to religion. They say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, which means they don't go to church, they don't go to synagogue, they just have their own idea of God, whatever that may be. When we talk about spirituality, we're talking about our walk with God. Uh, it's funny how they try to grasp the term because you're dealing with something that you really can't get out of a book. Spirituality is something that's lived and experienced. It's not so much studied in the classical sense. So it's interesting. When I was gathering the textbooks for the course, I checked the Jewish sources, and most of the books on spirituality had to do with ritual practice. On the other hand, when I looked at the Christian books on spirituality, most of them had to do with theology. Theology, as I said earlier, is not in itself spirituality. Is it a spiritual practice? It can be. But is it necessarily? No. The real question is, what is it? What is it that makes something spiritual? The way I like to liken it is in the Jewish practice. Before you eat something, you stop and you make a blessing over it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who created all things by his word. That would be one type of prayer. Now, why is it important to do this? At least in Jewish thought, it elevates us. I don't know if any of you have dogs as pets. I have 3 dogs. 2 of them are greyhounds, rescues, and the other is a little mutt that's about 12 pounds that's also a rescue who rules the roost. Anyway, if you've ever fed your dogs or watched a dog being fed, you put the food into the bowl and they're there like vultures, and the minute the food hits the bowl, their snoots are inside and they're eating. It's an animal act. This is what most people do when they're eating. If their food comes to a restaurant, they're in a restaurant, the food comes and they immediately start eating. They have manners, they wait for everybody else, but we're not going into that. When you pause and stop and bless God before you eat, you have transformed an animal act into a godly act, into a holy act. And that is what spirituality is about. I ask you to consider this question, and really it's a question worth consideration, not just now, but throughout the course. And I've been thinking of it throughout my life. What does it take to transform a moment into holiness? What does it take to transform a moment into holiness? When we talk about spirituality, we're talking about lifting our hearts to God. We're talking about transforming the common world around us, common, profane, into something holy. Our lives are supposed to be lives of holiness. Paul said that we should present our bodies as living sacrifices, presentable to God. Part of being a living sacrifice is not just laying down on an altar, but transforming our lives into something godly. As you know from studying the New Testament, Yeshua taught by telling stories, parables. When he taught these parables, they asked him, "Why don't you tell them plainly? Why do you speak in parables?" And he said that because hearing they do not hear, and seeing they do not see. When you read a book, at least a theology book or a book that imparts information to you, it feeds your head. It gives you information. You can memorize it. You can learn from it. But it may not touch your heart. When you hear a story, it can touch your heart. And we begin to understand in a different way. There was a book that I had wanted to have us read, but unfortunately it's not in print. But I'm going to tell you the story from the book. The book was called Under the Table and How to Get Up. And it's a story that was told by Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, who was a Hasidic rabbi. One of my rabbis was a Breslov rabbi, so I'm quite influenced by him. Anyway, here's the story. There was once a king who ruled over a faraway kingdom. There are always faraway kingdoms. And he had an only son. And his son went literally mad. He went crazy. He began to think that he was a turkey. He took off his clothes. He lived under the dining room table, and he commanded the servants to bring him bones and crumbs that were supposed to be all he was going to eat. Well, the king was horrified. He sent for the wisest men in the kingdom. He sent for the best doctors in the kingdom, and they all examined him, and they told the king, "We're sorry, there is nothing we can do for him. The best thing you can do is put him away in an asylum." Well, the king was devastated. There was nothing that could be done for his only son. One day, a wise man came to the king and said, "I can cure your son if you will let me." And the king, who had no option, said, "Please, anything you can do, please do it." So the wise man gave instructions to the servants, and then he took off his clothes and he went under the table with the prince. And the prince looked at him and said, "Who are you?" And the wise man looked back at him and said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "I'm a turkey." Well, the wise man said, "Really? I'm a turkey too." So the prince was good with that, and they pecked at crumbs and chewed on bones and got used to each other. And then the wise man gave a signal from under the table, and one of the servants put a couple of shirts under the table. The wise man put on his shirt. And the turkey prince looked at him and said, "Hey, I thought you said you were a turkey. Turkeys don't wear shirts." The wise man said, "You think you can," he said, You think you can't wear a shirt and be a turkey? He says, you can wear a shirt and be a turkey. So the prince put on his shirt. And they were under there for a while, and the wise man gave another signal, and they threw a couple of pair of trousers underneath. The wise man put on the trousers. The prince looked at him and said, you said you were a turkey. Turkeys don't wear trousers. And he said, you don't think you can be a prince? You don't think you can be a turkey and wear trousers? You can be a turkey and wear trousers. So the prince put on his trousers. And they did this until they were both completely dressed. And then the wise man gave another signal, and they put a tray of delicious food on the, under the table. And the wise man started eating, and he was going, oh, this is delicious, it's great. And the turkey prince looked at him and said, you said you were a turkey. Turkeys don't eat that food. He said, you don't think that you can be a turkey and eat this food? He says, you can be a turkey and eat this food. So he started eating. Then the wise man said, just a minute. He got up, got from under the table, picked up the tray and put it on the table and sat at the table. The turkey prince stuck his head up from under the table. He says, hey, what are you doing up there? He said, I'm eating. He said, turkeys don't eat at the table. And he said, you don't think you can be a turkey and eat at the table? You can be a turkey and eat at the table. So the prince got up and sat at the table, and he began to eat. And that is how he cured him. What is the meaning of this story? As God's people, we are like the turkey prince. We're princes with God, but yet the world tells us that we're turkeys, and we act like turkeys. God gave his word and his presence to us to lead us to recognize that we are God's princes and princesses. And the way back to becoming who we are with God is through his word and through his commandments. His commandments are his spiritual practices, the things, the steps that will lead us back. And how do we do that? You look at the Bible and it's got 613 commandments. And sometimes we wonder, what are we supposed to do? Which should we do? How can I do it? How should I do it? Is it right? Is it wrong? How much should I do? Do I need to do anything? And there are all kinds of theologies that'll tell you you don't have to do anything, you have to do everything. The story tells us, begin with one thing. Put on your shirt. Begin with one thing. And as you do that, you add to it a second. And as you do that, you add to it third. And then a fourth. And then you realize you're doing more and more, not out of a sense of obligation, but out of a sense of self-identity, who we are in God. And we begin to adapt to a new godly lifestyle. And we become the people God intended us to be, a people whose lives are lives that are transformed by the awareness and presence of him. So in this first section, this first week, we're going to look at what is Jewish prayer. What is Jewish ritual? We're going to talk about the various sections of the Siddur, how they might be used and adapted as a resource, and how do we reach past the ritual to the reality of God in our lives. Till next time, shalom.